Have two questions to answer if Sakir was found to have broken the rules.
Is receiving a fixed penalty notice a resigning matter? To which the answer has to be a version of yes, because that's what they said should happen when Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson got fixed penalty notices. So if the answer is yes, well then the second question is what happens if Sir Keir Starmer gets a fixed penalty notice? Will he resign? He's called for Rishi Sunak to resign.
A 34-year-old man has admitted killing a husband and wife in Somerset while their children slept upstairs. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell, both in their 30s, died at their home in Norton Fitzwarren last November. Colin Reeves has denied murder but admitted manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. It's now going to be easier for British musicians to tour in the European Union. Restrictions that have been imposed on them after Brexit are due to be relaxed. It will make it easier for them to move equipment between Britain and the bloc for music concerts, sports and cultural events. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 115 points at 73.88. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.17. LBC weather, rain overnight in southeast England and some of Wales. A mostly fine, warm evening, otherwise a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Alice Bell.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Andrew Pearce.
So now let's get somebody who really knows what they're talking about, which is not me. I'm going to talk to Ben Page, who's the Chief Executive at Ipsos Mori, about what's happened today. It's been the biggest test of public opinion politically since the general election back in December 2019, when Boris won that landslide, the first Tory landslide since 1987, majority of 80-odd, wasn't it? Get Brexit done. He was then seen as the great vote winner, but the brand has been a bit tarnished, hasn't it? Not least by his response to Partygate. There were no parties, there were about 14 of them. Also, the noises off, the ghastly Tory MP watching porn in the House of Commons chamber. I've been writing about Westminster, broadcasting about Westminster for the best over 30 years. I never ever thought I'd ever kind over some sex case. It's been pretty torrid for the Tory party, but looking at the figures, to me, it seems like it's not been the disaster many predicted, but I'm conscious that in the run-up to these elections, there's what we call management expectation. The subtle, or not so subtle, massaging of opinion to try to create a scenario whereby, well, if it's 800 losses for the Tories, that's a disaster. Currently, they're about 330, so Harper's worse again. But Labour, they've done brilliantly in London. They've won 3 boroughs. They've lost Harrow. Not quite sure what went wrong there for Labour. They've made other gains, but they lost Hull to the Lib Dems, a big blow, and they haven't made the inroads you might have expected in the so-called Red Wall. That's my summary. Let's get Ben Page's assessment, because he knows better. Ben, evening to you.
Good evening.
Ben, I've got a few people firing emails at me saying, how dare you try and say Labour couldn't possibly form a government on the basis of local elections. Their local elections turnout's low, but we always do try to extrapolate. If this were a general election, albeit on a low turnout, Labour, I think, would be the largest party, but way short of an overall majority.
Absolutely. The hill that Labour has to climb to actually form a majority government is absolutely vast. The only time that anybody has achieved the type of swing that they need was a certain Mr. Blair 25 years ago. And so this is not giving us any signs at the moment that that is going to happen, to be quite honest. On the other hand, it's not great for the Conservatives, particularly to lose 2 flagship councils in London, one of which has never, ever been controlled by anybody other than the Conservatives.
It's been downhill in London for them, though, for quite a long time. I think if the Wandsworth Council election had been on the same time as the general election in 2019, they'd probably have lost it then, wouldn't they?
Potentially, yes. And the challenge for Labour is that it's piling up votes in places like London, but it isn't making the sorts of inroads that it needs to make in what you might think were its natural constituency and some of these more deprived areas of the North and the Midlands. And the Conservatives are actually hanging on fairly well there. So, I mean, I think both sides will be sort of saying, well, it's, Labour will have a narrative about taking the sort of scalps from the Conservatives, making some progress in the South. The Lib Dems will be talking about their comeback. And, of course, they do put pressure on the Conservatives if they're going to have a revival, particularly in the Southwest. But all of this comes with a huge pinch of salt because most people didn't vote in these elections. And if you look at the underlying sort of dynamics, the polls, which have the Labour 5 to 6, 8 points ahead, are broadly replicated in what's happened in these elections. And if you look at the characteristics of the two men, the two leaders of the parties, which are also part of it, Boris Johnson is pretty unpopular, but Mrs Thatcher did come back from that position and win general elections, helped sometimes by wars and other things.
Yeah.
And Keir Starmer, he isn't Tony Blair. I think this is the key challenge. They're not making the sorts of inroads that you would expect from a party that was going to sort of win a general election anytime soon. So they'll both find good things and bad things in this, but it probably is less game-changing than we might think.
And the focus groups that the political parties increasingly turn to, these are focus groups of floating voters. I know that some of those that have been done for number 10, if Keir Starmer's mentioned, it's often only at prompting by whoever's conducting the questions. Sometimes people say who, but according to those focus groups, Starmer has not made a big cut through. Is that, in your view, Ben, part of what's holding Labour back?
Well, it's certainly not the only. It's certainly not the only thing. But Keir Starmer's ratings are not yet. They are improving or becoming in some ways less negative. Whereas Boris Johnson's got is very Marmite, and at the moment he's got many more people who are negative about it than positive. The point about Keir Starmer is that when you look at his ratings and you compare him to previous leaders of the opposition, there are two leaders of the opposition who went on to become Prime Minister in the last 40 years, Mr Blair and Mr Cameron. Mr Starmer's ratings at this point are not close to where those two eventually got to before they went on to win. So, no, there's still a lot of people who haven't made up their mind. Among those who have, he's got more people who are positive about him than the Prime Minister, but and fewer who are negative. But his net score is still net negative. He's got more people who dislike him than like him. And that is a problem when you're the challenger.
Yeah, and now Partygate, Ben, we know it was a factor on the doorstep. It depended in which constituency you're in, but we know it's a factor. Will that fade? I suppose it depends how many fines he gets, if Boris Johnson's going to get more. But in your view, will that begin to fade as an issue as we get closer to a general election?
I suspect so, and I suspect it will be more about competence to manage the economy. And on that, the Conservatives still have a small lead. It's been dropping, but they've got a small lead. Bizarrely, Labour are now seen as ahead on tax, which is not normally the position. So this is a sort of topsy-turvy world where the Conservatives are doing better than ever among working class voters, thanks to Brexit, and conversely, Labour, traditionally the party of the working class, is doing better among middle class voters than ever. So, no, we will see, but I think it will be about the economy rather than Partygate. But Partygate is important because it's back to this problem of the Conservatives, and particularly Boris Johnson, an older Tonian, a bit out of touch, and one rule for him and not for everybody else, and that is a problem.
The Lib Dems, of course, I know they'll get cross with me. I talked to the Lib Dem chief whip earlier in the programme. I said, you are seen as the party of protest. You get very cross about that, bearing in mind they won the council in Harrow and they've had a good day. They've gained more councils than anybody else. Are they genuinely making a breakthrough in your view, Ben, or is this classic local election time where people can't bear the Tories, they want to protest, they think, OK, we'll vote Lib Dem?
I think there's an element of that, but I think there is also some sign that moderate Conservatives who might have difficulties voting Labour can see the Liberal Democrats as the natural choice. And of course, that victories by Lib Dems in some seats where Labour is unelectable is part of how Labour would eventually win a majority. So, and the remaining factor, the fact that the Conservative Party is tacked to the populist right, does mean that some of its central, I suppose, wet Tory voters, I don't know how you want to define them, particularly people who are still unhappy about Brexit, and there are some, are going to be attracted to the Liberal Democrats. And so but at the moment, it's not these are local election results. Let's wait and see what actually happens at some by-elections and even beyond that, of course, the election itself.
Can I ask you too, a big story today, I suspected it was going to happen. The police in Durham have now decided there is significant new evidence that's come to light, and they are now investigating what went on in what's been known either as Durham Gate or Beer Gate. Keir Starmer in that Labour MP's office having a beer, filmed having a beer, curries were delivered, we know that. He says they were just having a break from work. The film of him having the beer was at 10:10 at night on a Friday. Some people saying it stretches credulity to think at the end of a long week he then returned to work. What work was he doing? Now, the police are investigating that. How damaging is that for Starmer when you consider how much he's attacked and for how long he's attacked Boris Johnson for Partygate? And we looked it up, Ben. He was saying Boris Johnson should go in January the moment it was announced the police were going to, after all, investigate.
Well, it's not great, although, you've got to remember that in the United Kingdom at the moment, we have a record number. We've been tracking the public opinion monthly since 1974. We've got a pretty much all-time high spontaneous I'm fed up with all our politicians. So a lot of this is priced in for both men, to be honest. But on the other hand, given that he's a lawyer and has said that one should resign in this circumstance, if he was given a fixed penalty notice over that would make it difficult. Although the fact that the Prime Minister may receive many fixed penalty notices and not resign may just confirm people's prejudices about politicians.
It would make it's interesting, isn't it? Because Ben, potentially, just say Starmer was fined, pressure then would be on Boris to go as well, particularly if he got more than one fine. We could end up having 2 leadership contests.
Exactly. Neither of these people has record popularity, let's put it that way. We will see. I do think at the end, the longer it drags on, and also as the pandemic